Have you ever wondered how Cain, one of the first sons of Adam and Eve, could have found a wife and had a child if Adam and Eve were the only parents of humanity? This mystery may seem intriguing, but by delving into the details between the lines of the Bible, we find fascinating answers that can shed light on this apparent enigma. In this video, we will uncover the answer, and I assure you, it will surprise you. So, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and let's get into the video. The creation of Adam and Eve is one of the most significant events in biblical narrative, marking the beginning of humanity according to the Genesis account. God created Adam from the dust of the earth and gave him life by breathing into his nostrils. Then, God created Eve from one of Adam's ribs, establishing the first marriage and the beginning of humanity. This creation was not only the start of life, but also the beginning of the relationship between God and his creation, setting the stage for the biblical story that would follow. After the creation of Adam and Eve and the establishment of their life in the Garden of Eden, they began to have children. Among their children were Cain and Abel, two brothers who grew up in a world that, although marked by the purity of the initial creation, was about to face the first trials and challenges. Cain became a farmer, dedicating himself to cultivating the land, while Abel became a shepherd, tending to his flocks. The Bible recounts that over time, both brothers decided to make offerings to God as an expression of worship and gratitude. Cain offered fruits from the land, while Abel presented the best of his flock, offering the fattest and most valuable parts of his sheep. This act of devotion was done with a sincere heart, reflecting Abel's excellence and dedication to God. However, the Lord looked favorably on Abel's offering, but did not accept Cain's. The exact reason for this difference is not detailed in the Bible, but it is interpreted as a matter of attitude and the quality of the offering. Abel's offering was considered more significant because he gave the best of what he had, while Cain's did not stand out in the same way. This acceptance and rejection of the offerings caused deep discontent in Cain, which ignited his anger and envy toward Abel. Feeling frustrated and demoralized, Cain's anger not only brought him down, but also turned into deep resentment toward his brother. God noticed Cain's emotional turmoil and warned him about the danger that his anger represented. He told him that sin was at the door and that he needed to master his feelings to avoid succumbing to temptation. This divine warning was intended to prevent Cain from falling into sin, offering him the opportunity to repent and change. Unfortunately, Cain was consumed by anger and envy. He invited Abel to go into the field, an isolated place away from the presence of others. The tension between the brothers grew, and Cain, in a fit of rage, attacked Abel and brutally killed him. This act of violence marked the first recorded death in human history and brought a new dimension of sin and suffering into the world created by God. After the murder, God confronted Cain and asked him where Abel was. Cain, trying to hide his crime, responded indifferently, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" This response not only showed his attempt to evade the consequences, but also revealed his lack of remorse and responsibility. God, knowing the truth, revealed to Cain the consequences of his act. He would be cursed and become a wanderer on the earth, unable to cultivate the land that had once been his livelihood. Cain's curse was twofold. Not only would he face a life of wandering, but the fruits of the land which he had once successfully cultivated would no longer prosper for him. The life of a farmer that Cain knew was now ruined. His response to God's curse reveals his anguish and fear for the future, expressing his concern that he would be condemned to wander aimlessly and without protection, fearing that someone would find him and avenge Abel's death. In response to this concern, God marked Cain with a sign. This sign was meant to protect him from any vengeance that might be sought against him. Although the Bible does not describe the nature of this mark in detail, It served to ensure that Cain would not be killed by others, despite his curse. After this interaction with God, Cain left his presence and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The Bible mentions that Cain knew his wife, with whom he had a son, Enoch. Furthermore, the verse highlights that Cain built a city and named it after his son. Enoch and the construction of the city is a significant milestone in the narrative, as it represents the beginning of the establishment of human communities. However, it is here that doubts begin to arise. The text does not provide explicit details about how or with whom Cain married. In verse 17, it is only mentioned that Cain knew his wife. The possibility that other human beings existed at the time of Cain, besides Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel, is an interpretation that attempts to fill the gaps in the biblical narrative and address questions related to the expansion of the human population. Cain's fear of being killed by others and the mark that God placed on him, as described in the Bible, raise important questions about the existence of other humans beyond Adam and Eve. In Genesis 4:14, Cain says, "Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." This fear indicates the possible existence of a population large enough for Cain to be concerned about being found and punished by a group of individuals. In the following verse, the Bible says, "But the Lord said to him, 'Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over.' Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him." These details help us understand that, in the context of the biblical narrative, the earth may already have been inhabited by a larger population besides Adam and Eve's family. Cain's concern about being found and the divine intervention to protect him suggest the presence of other humans in addition to the main characters in the story, which hints at a more widespread population that coexisted with the primordial family. One of the less accepted interpretations suggests that, in addition to Adam and Eve's family, God may have created other human beings independently. Proponents of this theory argue that to explain the rapid multiplication of the human population described in the Bible, a significant number of individuals would be necessary, something that would be difficult to achieve solely with the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. This interpretation seeks to reconcile the biblical narrative with archaeological and anthropological evidence, indicating the presence of more extensive human communities in antiquity. Evidence such as the existence of complex societies and human settlement remains, dated to early periods, seems to suggest a broader population scenario. However, it is crucial to note that this interpretation remains speculative and is not explicitly supported by the biblical text. The narrative of Genesis focuses on the story of Adam and Eve's family without directly mentioning other contemporary human groups. The Bible does not offer additional details about the creation of other human beings beyond the scope of the primordial family, limiting the discussion to a more focused and specific account. Therefore, while this theory attempts to align the biblical narrative with scientific discoveries, it is not confirmed by the sacred text and remains a debated hypothesis among scholars and theologians. On the other hand, the more accepted theory is that Cain may have married a sister or niece based on the cultural practices and context of the time described in the biblical narrative. The Bible, in Genesis, does not specify that Adam and Eve had only Cain and Abel as children. In fact, in Genesis 4:1, Eve says, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man," referring to Cain. But there is no similar statement after Abel's birth, which suggests that other children may have been born between these events. The absence of an explicit mention of other sons and daughters between Cain and Abel has led some scholars and theologians to speculate that Adam and Eve had a more extensive lineage than is directly narrated. The cultural and historical understanding of the time indicates that families tended to be large, and the lack of a specific restriction in the biblical text allows for the possibility that Cain may have married a sister or close relative. This interpretation is reinforced by the reference to other sons and daughters of Adam and Eve in Genesis 5:4 after the birth of Seth, which states that Adam had sons and daughters. This mention suggests a broader lineage beyond the individually named children. Thus, the biblical text does not limit the descendants of Adam and Eve to just Cain, Abel, and Seth, allowing for a more extensive interpretation of their family's size. It is worth noting that in the absence of a significant population outside of Adam and Eve's family, the idea that Cain married a sister emerges as a plausible explanation for continuing the human lineage within the cultural and temporal context of the biblical narrative. Marriage between siblings or close relatives would not have been unusual in the early days of humanity, according to the biblical perspective, and would have been necessary for the growth of the human population. Marriage between close relatives was considered acceptable and even necessary for the propagation of humanity. This interpretation is consistent with the unique circumstances described in the Bible, which does not explicitly prohibit sibling marriage in the early stages of human history. On the contrary, the Bible presents several examples of marriages between close relatives. A notable example is the case of Noah's sons. After the flood, Noah and his wife, along with their sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were the only survivors tasked with repopulating the earth. Noah's sons had to marry each other or their sisters, given the absence of other available people. Another important example is the marriage of Abraham to Sarah, his half-sister. The biblical narrative in Genesis 20:12 confirms that Abraham and Sarah shared the same father, making them half-siblings. At that time, marriages between close relatives, such as half-siblings, were accepted and often necessary to maintain family lineage continuity. Isaac, Abraham's son, also followed this practice by marrying Rebekah, who was his cousin. Marriage between cousins was common and reflected the cultural norms of ancient society. Similarly, Jacob, Abraham's grandson, married his cousins. Though these marriages may seem unusual today, they were established norms in the culture and historical context of the time. It is important to note that the laws prohibiting marriage between close relatives, as described in the Mosaic Law, were established long after these events, approximately 2,500 years after the creation of Adam and Eve. These laws, part of the covenant given to Moses, established more restrictive ethical and social standards, reflecting the evolution of cultural norms and the need to maintain genetic health and social order in a more complex society. The biblical narrative often focuses on the story of Cain and Abel, two of Adam and Eve's most well-known children. It is interesting how Jewish and Christian traditions often overlook the stories of secondary characters, highlighting more dramatic narratives. This tendency sometimes obscures the presence and trajectory of other sons and daughters of this first human family, creating a gap in understanding the experiences and destinies of the other members, whose lives also played significant roles in shaping the fabric of human history. Despite the fact that the Bible in Genesis 5:4 mentions that Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters besides Cain and Abel, it seems that the absence of specific names for these daughters contributes to their stories being marginalized, keeping them anonymous while Cain and Abel take central roles. On the other hand, it is perfectly understandable that the Bible cannot cover the lives of all characters. It is practically impossible to describe the vastness of information from the creation of the world to the end of time in a single book. In this sense, secondary texts such as the Book of Jubilees have emerged, Although not widely recognized, this book emerges as an alternative source that explores details about some lesser-known figures, including the daughters of Adam and Eve. These characters, who have been somewhat forgotten, provide a broader perspective on the extensive lineage of the first human pair. However, it is essential to emphasize that the Book of Jubilees is considered apocryphal, meaning it is not part of the official biblical canon, either Jewish or Christian. In simple terms, it is not considered sacred scripture by the major religious traditions, mainly due to the lack of consensus on its authorship and origin, as well as containing interpretations that diverge from more accepted versions. Nevertheless, the historical relevance of the Book of Jubilees cannot be underestimated. It offers a unique view of the events narrated in Genesis, especially those related to the creation of the world, Adam and Eve, and other characters of the Old Testament. Its nickname, the Little Genesis, reflects its close relationship with the events and characters described in the Book of Genesis. This apocryphal book provides a deeper interpretation of the story, going beyond what is found in the Bible, including the mention of the names of Adam and Eve's daughters, as well as the description of their lives. This narrative is especially significant for some Jewish and Christian communities seeking additional understanding of the early days of humanity. When researching the Book of Jubilees for the names of Adam and Eve's daughters, we find the figures of Aklima and Azura identified as the wives of Cain and Seth, respectively. In the Book of Genesis, chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, we read that Cain left the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. There Cain knew his wife, who conceived and bore Enoch. Later, Cain built a city and named it after his son Enoch. In some Jewish traditions, Aklima, also known as Avon, is mentioned as Cain's wife, the firstborn of Adam and Eve. Although her name does not appear in the Bible, it is mentioned in apocryphal texts like the Book of Jubilees. The etymology of her name, derived from Hebrew or Phoenician, suggests meanings such as sin or strength. As Cain's wife, her name could symbolize the power or influence she exerted in the lineage of Adam and Eve's firstborn. At the same time, the connotation of sin may reflect the challenges and adversities faced by Cain and Aklima after their exile. Cain met Avon in Nod, and the biblical narrative emphasizes that, following this encounter, he founded the city of Enoch, one of his greatest achievements after the tragic incident with Abel. The Book of Jubilees mentions this city as one of Cain's accomplishments, who, after his brother's death, became a central figure in human history, marking the beginning of civilization. Although the Bible does not specify the identity of Cain's wife or the origin of their relationship, the biblical narrative focuses on the main characters: Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, and Seth. However, when Cain met Avon, it is likely that the land was already well populated, suggesting the existence of more people besides the 5 individuals mentioned. Some theories propose that Cain's wife may have been his niece, the daughter of Seth. This idea is based on the long period that passed between Cain's exile and his marriage to Avon. Some theologians suggest that this span was about 300 years, during which it is estimated that Adam and Eve may have had more than 50 sons and daughters, and Seth could have had more than 20 descendants. Another intriguing aspect of the early generations of humanity mentioned in the Bible is the remarkable longevity of the antediluvian figures. These patriarchs lived extraordinarily long lives, challenging our modern conceptions of the human lifespan. This phenomenon is particularly evident in the genealogies described in the Book of Genesis, where figures such as Adam, Seth, and Methuselah lived for hundreds of years. Adam, the first man, lived for 930 years, according to Genesis 5:5. His son Seth, who was born after Abel's death and played a crucial role in continuing the human line, lived for 912 years, as mentioned in Genesis 5:8. Enosh, Adam's grandson, lived for 905 years according to Genesis 5:11. These examples show that longevity was common in the early days of humanity. Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, is known for having lived 969 years, making him the longest living person mentioned in the Bible, according to Genesis 5:27. Various theories attempt to explain this exceptional longevity. One proposed explanation suggests that the Earth, in its early stages, had perfect climatic, atmospheric, and environmental conditions, which may have contributed to longer lifespans. According to this theory, the Earth's atmosphere before the flood offered greater protection from radiation and other factors that accelerate aging. Other scholars suggest that the genetics of early humans were different, more robust, allowing for longer lives. Additionally, some biblical interpretations point out that, after the flood, God decided to shorten human life. In Genesis 6:3, God declares, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years." This statement may indicate a planned reduction in human longevity after the flood, which is reflected in subsequent generations, where lifespans decrease considerably. After the flood, the ages of biblical figures significantly decreased. For example, Abraham lived 175 years according to Genesis 25:7, and Moses, one of the most prominent figures of the Old Testament, lived 120 years according to Deuteronomy 34:7. This progressive decline in longevity can be attributed to various changes in environmental conditions or divine will. One common explanation is that after the flood, the world's conditions changed, which affected the duration of human life, causing subsequent generations to live shorter lives. The change in environmental conditions after the flood had a significant impact on human longevity. Another factor that may have contributed was the gradual deterioration of genetic quality in subsequent generations due to marriages between close relatives. The decrease in longevity could also reflect changes in divine plans and in the conditions of humanity. Some scholars believe that God adjusted human longevity to adapt to the new times and the realities of the post-flood world, where the need for such long lives became less relevant. We can conclude that when Cain considered marriage, there were several sisters and nieces available, making it easy for him to find a close relative wife. This practice of marriages between close relatives, as mentioned earlier, persisted for a long time. Only with time, as the population significantly increased, were sexual relations between close relatives prohibited in order to prevent negative consequences, such as the risk of genetic defects and health problems resulting from interbreeding between relatives. The Bible makes it clear that the entire human race descends from Adam and Eve, and any contrary theory lacks biblical foundation, as expressed in Acts 17:26. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. This perspective clarifies the dynamics of relationships at that time and the formation of humanity from a single original couple. Another daughter of Adam and Eve, mentioned in the Book of Jubilees, is known as Azura, recognized as the wife of Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. Her symbolic association with the blue sky, or lapis lazuli, suggests a heavenly purity, and her name reflects the uniqueness she represents in the narrative. As Seth's wife, Azura directly influences the continuity of the righteous line, contributing to the preservation of the virtues and values desired in the biblical genealogy. It is worth noting that Seth was born after Abel's death. Eve believed that he had been appointed by God to establish a new lineage in place of Abel, who was killed by Cain. According to these traditions, Azura was initially Abel's wife, and after his death, she married Seth. From this union came notable descendants. Seth is a key figure in the biblical genealogy and plays a fundamental role in the continuation of the righteous line after the tumultuous episode between Cain and Abel. His union with Azura resulted in contributions that shaped key events in the Bible. Among Seth's children, Enosh stands out, whose name means frail man. Enosh is recognized for being the first to call upon the name of the Lord, establishing a spiritual connection that would become a central practice in later religious traditions. In addition to Enosh, Enoch, Seth's son, is one of the most notable figures of this lineage. Enoch is known for his exceptional closeness to God, to the point that he walked with God, according to the biblical account. His life of righteousness and direct communion with the divine stands out as a singular contribution, representing an example of devotion that transcended his time. Because of these factors, Enoch was one of the only human beings who did not experience death, as he was taken directly by God. Nevertheless, one of the most notable contributions from Seth's lineage is Noah, the righteous builder of the ark during the flood. Noah, son of Lamech and grandson of Seth, was chosen by God to preserve humanity and the diversity of creatures during the global cataclysm. His obedience and faith, recorded in the narrative of the flood, outline his essential role in the continuity of humanity. The importance of Seth's lineage in the fulfillment of divine plans for the redemption of humanity is fundamental. Each individual in this line played a crucial role in building the human legacy and preserving faith and justice, despite the challenges their generations faced. Religious traditions, especially when exploring the lineages of Cain and Abel, in contrast to those of Seth and Azura, present an intriguing duality in the human condition, expressed through moral and spiritual choices. Cain, as the firstborn of Adam and Eve, followed a path marked by decisions that reflect human weaknesses. In contrast, the lineage of Seth and Azura narrates moral and spiritual choices more aligned with divine will. These two lines, despite their significant differences, are important and reflect the inherent duality of the human condition, where moral and spiritual decisions shape the destiny of future generations. It is worth mentioning again that the Book of Jubilees is considered apocryphal, meaning it is not officially recognized by the main religious traditions, both Jewish and Christian. All of this information about Adam and Eve's daughters may vary depending on different interpretations and religious beliefs. The Bible is a sacred book that focuses on the most important messages about faith and our relationship with God. It is not intended to tell every detail or the story of every person who existed. Instead, it focuses on the essential lessons and teachings for our spiritual and moral life. God uses the Bible to show us what is truly important: His love, His justice, and how He wants us to live. It is important to understand that a unique book like the Bible cannot include everything about history or every character. The Bible is like a guide that provides us with the necessary information to know God and follow His ways. It helps us understand what is fundamental for our lives and our relationship with Him, without trying to cover every aspect of life and history. God's plans are perfect, but they are also bigger than what we can fully comprehend. The Bible gives us a glimpse of God's love and justice, but it does not reveal everything about His purposes. In Isaiah 55:8-9 we read, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This means that there are things about God and His plans that are beyond our understanding. God does not expect us to understand everything. He wants us to trust in Him and seek His love and guidance. The Bible is a gift that helps us know God better and live according to His teachings, even if we don't know all the details. Now, I would like to know your opinion. Do you believe in the information presented by the Book of Jubilees, even though it is an apocryphal text? Who do you think was Cain's wife? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts with us. Your opinion is very important to us. Thank you for watching the video. Blessings and may God be with you.